Catholic pilgrims, as we learn from one of Spain's most revered saints, Saint Teresa of Avila, a spirited doctor of the Church. Join me, Amy Thomas, once a week as we read from Saint Teresa's book, The Interior Castle. Hello, Catholic pilgrims. We return for another day to learn from our great Saint Teresa. So recently I was in Portugal with my family for vacation, and there's the city there called Sintra, and it's a mountain city with the most breathtaking views. It definitely feels like old Europe with its architecture and its old world vibes. And one of the main reasons people visit Sintra is to see the many castles or palaces there. There's like 5, I think. The most famous one is the Palace of Pina, which is at the pinnacle of the tallest mountain. And yes, we hiked all the way to the top one day to go see this palace. And it is a hike, I'm telling you. We get all the way to the top and the workers are on strike. And we had no idea. And so we could not get in that day. But we made other plans. But still, it was like, oh my gosh, we hiked this very steep mountain and didn't get the reward of seeing the palace. That day we did end up going back another day and we got in to see it. But it stands out because it's brightly colored yellow and red, and with the green forest around it, it's just very striking against a blue sky. Very pretty. At one time, it was a monastery dating back to the 12th century. But in 1755, there was a very devastating earthquake in Portugal that left the monastery basically in ruins. Though the monks fought to keep it running. But sadly, in 1834, the monastery had to be abandoned as all religious orders were abolished in Portugal. And I don't know exactly why. I haven't had time to really research that, but that was the case. But then, in the later part of the 19th century, a king purchased it and converted it into a summer palace. It's still keeping the beautiful little chapel and other key pieces of evidence of the building's Catholic roots. So it's so popular that you have to have a time slot to enter so that they can keep the numbers down and it's not just packed with people. And as you're standing in line waiting to go in, you literally have to like crane your neck way back to look up at this palace over you. And in a way, it kind of reminds me of a Disneyland palace, sort of, because of its vibrant colors and its very ornate architectural decorations on the outside and on the inside as well. But man, you really have to lean way back in order to kind of take it all in, and even then you really can't. But once we got inside and started walking around the castle, we discovered there were so many nooks and crannies to explore, and my son was just kind of running around trying to see all these different places, and just very cool. You can just imagine how much fun it would have been to play there as a kid. But there were just so many things to see, and lots of the belongings of the former nobilities that had resided there in the palace. And as I was walking around, I noticed that there were people there just to have their bucket list moment. As we moved in the line from room to room, sometimes there were people who missed an entire room because they were looking down at their phones. And there were other people there that did seem very engaged, looking around, reading the signs, taking it all in. They were really trying to immerse themselves in this very unique experience. Now today, St. Teresa is going to speak more about the castle of our soul. And she says, first, we have to have self-knowledge to enter the soul. And we're going to talk about what that means on the other side of our readings. But most importantly, we need humility to go along with our self-knowledge. And walking through the palace in Sintra helped me formulate my thoughts on what St. Teresa is trying to express here. So today we will be reading from the First Mansion, chapter 2, numbers 8 through 12. But before we begin, let's hear from our sponsor, Chrism Press. Kate Montclair is dying, but she's not ready to give up on life just yet. In The Good Death of Kate Montclair by Daniel McKerney, follow Kate's journey as she seeks to find meaning and purpose in her final days. With the help of old friends and the Washington, D.C. Death Symposium, Kate grapples with big questions about life and death, love and loss, and what it all means. Don't miss this powerful and thought-provoking novel from Chrism Press. Go to chrismpress.com/store to purchase your copy, and if you use the code PILGRIM15, you get 15% off your first order. I believe that this particular book just dropped on March 15th, 2023, so it is very new and it looks so interesting. I've been reading through it. They did give me a copy to look through, and I'm a little bit behind because I was on vacation, but it's a very interesting topic, and I'm very interested to see where it goes. Kate has cancer, and she's really struggling with the whole life and death situation. So please check that out at chrismpress.com/store. Okay, so let's see what St. Teresa has to share with us today. Now let us turn at last to our castle with its many mansions. You must not think of a suite of rooms placed in succession, but fix your eyes on the keep, the court inhabited by the king. Like the kernel of the palmetto, from which several rinds must be removed before coming to the eatable part, this principal chamber is surrounded by many others. However large, magnificent, and spacious you imagine this castle to be, you cannot exaggerate it. The capacity of the soul is beyond all our understanding, and the sun within this palace enlightens every part of it. A soul which gives itself to prayer, either much or little, should on no account be kept within narrow bounds. Since God has given it such great dignity, permit it to wander at will through the rooms of the castle from the lowest to the highest. Let it not force itself to remain for very long in the same mansion, even that of self-knowledge. Mark well, however, that self-knowledge is indispensable, even for those whom God takes to dwell in the same mansion with himself. Nothing else, however elevated, perfects the soul which must never seek to forget its own nothingness. Let humility be always at work, like the bee in the honeycomb, or all will be lost. But remember, the bee leaves its hive to fly in search of flowers, and the soul should sometimes cease thinking of itself to rise in meditation on the grandeur and majesty of its God. It will learn its own baseness better thus than by self-contemplation, and will be freer from the reptiles which enter the first room where self-knowledge is acquired. Although it is a great grace from God to practice self-examination, yet too much is as bad as too little, as they say. Believe me, by God's help, we shall advance more by contemplating the divinity than by keeping our eyes fixed on ourselves, poor creatures of earth that we are. I do not know whether I have put this clearly. Self-knowledge is of such consequence that I would not have you careless of it, though you may be lifted to heaven in prayer, because while on earth nothing is more needful than humility. Therefore, I repeat, not only a good way, but the best of all ways, is to endeavor to enter first by the room where humility is practiced, which is far better than at once rushing on to the others. This is the right road. If we know how easy and safe it is to walk by it, why ask for wings with which to fly? Let us rather try to learn how to advance quickly. I believe we shall never learn to know ourselves except by endeavoring to know God, for beholding His greatness, we are struck by our own baseness. His purity shows our foulness, and by meditating on his humility, we find how very far we are from being humble. Two advantages are gained by this practice. First, it is clear that white looks far whiter when placed near something black, and on the contrary, black never looks so dark as when seen beside something white. Secondly, our understanding and will become more noble and capable of good in every way when we turn from ourselves to God. It is very injurious never to raise our minds above the mire of our own faults. I described how murky and fetid are the streams that spring from the source of a soul in mortal sin. Thus, although the case is not really the same, God forbid, this is only a comparison. While we are continually absorbed in contemplating the weakness of our earthly nature, the springs of our actions will never flow free from the mire of timid, weak, and cowardly thoughts, such as, I wonder whether people are noticing me or not. If I follow this course, will harm come to me? Dare I begin this work? Would it not be presumptuous? Is it right for anyone as faulty as myself to speak on sublime spiritual subjects? Will not people think too well of me if I make myself singular? Extremes are bad, even in virtue. Sinful as I am, I shall only fall the lower. Perhaps I shall fail and be a source of scandal to good people. Such a person as I am has no need of peculiarities. Alas, my daughters, what loss the devil must have caused to many a soul by such thoughts as these. It thinks such ideas, and many others of the same sort, I could mention, arise from humility. This comes from not understanding our own nature. Self-knowledge becomes so warped that unless we take our thoughts off ourselves, I am not surprised that these and many worse fears should threaten us. Therefore, I maintain, my daughters, that we should fix our eyes on Christ, our only good, and on his saints. There we shall learn true humility, and our minds will be ennobled, so that self-knowledge will not make us base and cowardly. Although only the first. This mansion contains great riches and such treasures that if the soul only manages to elude the reptiles dwelling there, it cannot fail to advance farther. Terrible are the wiles and stratagems the devil uses to hinder people from realizing their weakness and detecting his snares. What would you say is the biggest problem facing the world today? You may say people losing faith, a loss of reality, greed, destruction of the nuclear family. I would say yes to all of these, but then say that they all boil down to one thing: worship of the self. Our culture is plagued with an insatiable appetite for self-knowledge and for everyone to acknowledge us. St. Teresa says, quote, "Let it, the soul, not force itself to remain for very long in the same mansion, even that of self-knowledge," unquote. It is important that we think about ourselves, about being a child of God, about what our talents and gifts are that are to be used in service of God. But we shouldn't hang out in this mansion, she says, because when we do, we then stay focused on ourselves. And she goes through all of those things that we start to ask about ourselves. I wonder whether people are noticing me or not. If I follow this course, will harm come to me? Dare I begin this work? Would it not be presumptuous? And she goes on and on, all these questions that come into our minds when we stay focused on ourselves. Our self-knowledge, though, should make us realize our littleness and our dependence on God. However, if we don't move on through prayer to learn more about God, we are not going to grow. And we kind of have talked about this before. St. Teresa says, quote, "Believe me, by God's help, we shall advance more by contemplating the divinity than by keeping our eyes fixed on ourselves, poor creatures of earth that we are," unquote. And here's the irony. If we only stay focused on ourselves, we will actually never truly come to know ourselves. But that's not what the culture tells us. The culture tells us to spend every waking moment focused on ourselves. Only take care of yourselves. Do what you want to do. Only make yourself happy. You need to have self-care, and all these things that are just constant messages in our culture. And this is all in an effort to really know oneself. But St. Teresa says, I believe we shall never learn to know ourselves except by endeavoring to know God. For, beholding his greatness, we are struck by our own baseness. His purity shows our foulness. And by meditating on his humility, we find how very far we are from being humble. Now that all kinds of sounds negative, doesn't it? But it really isn't. If we only think of ourselves and think that we're perfect just the way we are, that we don't need to change for anybody, that we are just all that in a bag of chips, we will never really want to use our talents and gifts for the good of others. And we'll never really think about, what is the purpose of my life? What am I doing here? What am I supposed to be doing here? And we come to see ourselves as this mini God that can do it all. We can do it all on our own. But in reality, we need God's grace and help to do great and wonderful things. It's in that moment when we realize our helplessness and our propensity for sin and our lack of humility that we reach out to God and open ourselves up to him. And that's when he can get inside our souls and transform us into his image of us. And that is who we are truly meant to be. She then goes on to tell us that there are two great advantages to focusing on God. Well, there are many, but these are two great ones that she's pointing out here. And the first she says is, quote, it is clear that white looks far whiter when placed near something black. And this means we begin to see the ugliness of our sin, and we want to become more white, like Christ. The second thing she says is that, quote, our understanding and will become more noble and capable of good in every way when we turn ourselves to God. Because as we are thinking about God and we're spending time in prayer, we will try to align our wills more with God's will. And literally every time we do that, it works out for our benefit and the good of others. So how does this all relate back to what I talked about in the beginning with the different attitudes that people had while touring the castle? Well, those that entered the castle just to take selfies and say that they were at this really cool spot, they missed a chance to really learn. They missed an opportunity to really reflect and wonder about those that came before us, to learn some history, to absorb surroundings that can offer moments of reflection down the line. But those that went into the castle to expand their knowledge, to understand the past, to reflect on the way people used to live, those people grow and they start to see themselves as part of this big old world instead of the world just revolving around them. And so the first group of people, they're just stuck there in self-knowledge. They're just there to focus on themselves and, how can I make myself look good? How can I impress people with the places that I've been? And we're all guilty of this, to be sure, at different times in our lives. I'm not saying that I've never been guilty of this. Of course I have. But it's kind of a growing trend to be more and more this way. And to, just mark off the bucket list and to just show yourself in really cool places. My husband calls it the idolization of experiences. And so it's kind of like walking into the castle and staying stuck on just focusing on yourself. You never really get into the castle to see what's there. You just are missing everything around you. You know, there were times when people were walking through rooms that were so cool and they weren't looking around. They were looking at their phones, and I could tell that they were just, playing with pictures or texting and stuff. And I just wanted to say, you're missing this. You're missing this. You may never get another chance to come in here. And it's the same with staying stuck in self-knowledge and only focusing on ourselves. Now, the other group of people, and everybody can be this way as well, where they go into this wanting to really immerse themselves in the visit, to see what's in the castle. That's the people who enter the castle of the soul and say, okay, I don't want to just stay here focused on myself. I want to go find God in my soul. I want to go see myself through his eyes. And that's going to help me to grow and to change and to be transformed by him. And that's what we should really, really want. So we will end there for today. Just remember, going into the castle of our soul, Catholic pilgrims, we are meant to find something there other than just ourselves. We are meant to find God. So let's keep that in mind as we continue our journey. And I will see you back here soon. And until then, live the faith boldly and travel well.